Alrighty, good morning, and thank you again for joining in. The VMware User Group, or VMUG, is an independent, global, customer-led organization created to maximize members' use of VMware and partner solutions through knowledge, sharing, training, collaboration, and events. Get connected to a local VMUG community near you. We have chapters all over the country, all over the globe. Whether you're in Chicago, whether you're in Tennessee, wherever you are, we have communities all over. So get connected at myvmug.com. Please use the Q&A function for all your questions for Nathan here today. It's very easy to use the chat, but using the Q&A function allows us to track your question when you asked it. And if there's additional follow-up, we'll have that tracked through the Q&A. So please use the Q&A function if you have questions. And lastly, this session is being recorded. I know everyone wants access to the presentation after the fact. We are recording this. It will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel and it will be sent in a post wrap-up email. So rest assured, we will get this presentation out to you all after the fact. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to Nathan.
All right, thanks so much. Give me just a second to get my screen share going here. If you could confirm when it comes up, let me know that it's there, and I'll go ahead and get rolling. All right, can we see it good? Okay, great. I see a message in the chat looking like we're good to go. Hello, everybody. My name is Nathan Montierth. I lead the threat intelligence team at Vali Cyber. And today I'm going to be talking with you all about the threats that are facing hypervisors outside of the scope of just ransomware. We actually will touch on ransomware just a little bit because it is still a very pertinent threat. But we're going to try and broaden that scope a little bit to talk about some of the things that we've seen, particularly in the last year or two, from pretty sophisticated threat actors and less sophisticated threat actors that are targeting things like ESXi or other hypervisors. Let's make sure I can get my slides to progress here. There we go. Okay, so nation state attacks on hypervisors. This is, as I just alluded to, is something that we've seen a pretty big increase in. You can see some of the number that's there on the screen, right? The 700% increase in ESX ransomware attacks in particular over the course of 2025 or so. But there's been some other things that have been happening as well. A couple of the things that are listed out here are things like BRICKSTORM, which was a very was a pretty sophisticated attack perpetrated by some threat actors that are very likely associated with the PRC, and then FireAnt operations and their installation of malicious VIBs as well. One of the other techniques that we've also noticed that's actually not on this slide currently, but one of the other techniques that we've noted against hypervisors is things like data theft via virtual disk cloning. And these are all things that we're going to talk a little bit more about today as I kind of work through this presentation. I promise to everyone watching, there's a couple of slides up front that we're going to be working through here as I go over and kind of set the scene for what some of the threats that are prevalent against hypervisors today are. But then we're going to get into some more of the technical demonstrations. I've got a couple of recorded demos that we've done over the last little bit, demonstrating some of these and also how we can respond to them using tools like ZeroLock. To go over their objectives, I mean, again, this is something you can see here on the slide, but long-term persistence for continued observation and intelligence gathering is definitely one of the newer trends that we're seeing on hypervisors. For a lot of lower equity threat actors, we see things like kind of smash and grab ransomware attacks. But for more sophisticated threat actors, and particularly those who may be more nation state aligned, we are seeing that, of course, destructive campaigns, things with wide area of effects, for network degradation and things like that are definitely still there, but intelligence gathering operations do seem to focus a little bit more on quieter, longer term persistence, which is what we get into with things like the malicious VIBs that FireAnt uses or the BRICKSTORM malware, backdoors that we're seeing deployed against ESXi specifically. A lot of this ties into something that if you've heard us give a webinar or give a presentation at another VMUG event, you've probably heard us talk about this in about the last 12 months, over about the last year, is the updates that have been made to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. The reason that we talk about this is because it's important. MITRE ATT&CK, as I'm sure many folks who are attending this session will be aware, is a framework used for categorizing the tactics, techniques, and procedures used by threat actors to do bad things, right? To actually carry out cyber incidents or attacks. And the reason that we talk about this one is because one of the themes that we've been talking about for a long time is that ESXi and hypervisors have been a neglected and ignored part of most people's networks. A lot of organizations will abstract them as, infrastructure, or they'll consider one of the very traditional classic things is, hey, my virtualized environments are secure inherently, right? Like this is something that just because they are a sandbox environment, that means that there should be no communication, no in and out from the guest operating systems to the host, which especially over the course of 2025, I think got proved to not exactly be true. But we look at this because in the last few years, especially with some of the later versions of the MITRE ATT&CK framework starting in 2025, it's been recognized as an entire attack matrix in and of itself. So that includes some specific TTPs that have been added to the attack framework specifically for ESXi, and other ones that have been adopted from pre-existing matrices to apply to things like hypervisors and ESXi. So I won't bore you all by going through each and every one of the data points that's listed here on this slide. But you can take a look at any of these and understand that they do in fact apply to hypervisors. This is not a part of our network that we can continue to afford to ignore. It being added to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I think, is really just a harbinger of things to come. So this is really just an indication that in the future, things like compliance frameworks and regulatory bodies, I think, are going to be paying a lot more attention to hypervisors as it gets more and more notoriety from both threat actors and from security researchers. So one of the things that we talk about often, and this really I think is related to what we were just going over, that hypervisors have largely been ignored and neglected over the last couple of decades, is, well, hey, I've got my perimeter defenses. I've got a firewall on my network. I've got EDR on a lot of my guest operating systems or on the workstations or the servers that I'm using. But unfortunately, a lot of those types of things are really not enough. And we do need defenses on hypervisors themselves because of things like credential compromise, or the fact that lots of firewalls, although they do a good job of doing segmentation of networks, and sometimes of also monitoring some of that traffic, especially when you get into more sophisticated solutions. Unfortunately, there are ways to circumnavigate that. And unfortunately, there also are, and you need to look no further than the last couple months of CVEs to find vulnerabilities associated with some of these security tools used at the perimeter or within the network, like firewalls. Hardening and patching is another really good solution. However, sometimes for certain organizations, it can be a good idea and really not viable in practice, particularly when we get into hypervisors because of the place that they have and the necessity of high availability. Oftentimes what we hear from folks that we work with is, hey, I know there's a patch for this new vulnerability that just came out, but I don't have time to shut down all of my hypervisors or even shut down a few of my hypervisors and actually apply these patches. I have to wait for my normal patching cycle in 3 months or in 6 months or in a year or whatever it may be, right? So hardening and patching, great practices. Unfortunately, they're sometimes not sufficient or they're unrealistic given the timetables that we're working with. Traditional EDRs just don't have visibility into hypervisors, and that makes them a big struggle, as well as log monitoring is great, but unfortunately it doesn't capture everything. We don't get a high level of granularity, and they're easily modifiable, as we kind of detail here. So a lot of these perimeter-based defenses, or even what I would term more traditional defenses that we go to in the networks that we work in, are great, and we should have them. You should have a firewall. You should be protecting your credentials. You should be doing log monitoring. You should have EDR. And you should definitely be patching, but they're oftentimes not enough considering some of the new threats that exist against hypervisors and the ways that we're seeing them exploited. Here's just a couple of quick blurbs. I won't spend too much time on this one, from Mandia and Gartner, basically talking about, Gartner's talking a little bit about the preemptive security that we're seeing as a trend over the next couple of years in terms of recommendations for security tooling across the broad swath of security tools that exist. Preemptive security is becoming more of a crucial part of what's necessary to thwart modern threats. And then some reporting from Mandia just to kind of talk about why it basically backs up a lot of what I was just talking about and what we've been talking about for a couple of years. Is just that hypervisors are a blind spot. This is one of the dark corners of most folks' enterprise networks that they really don't have a lot of good visibility into. And if they do have good visibility, then they're probably not checking quite often enough. It's just not part of their security workflow. This is a problem that exists across the industry. It's not really anyone's fault in particular, other than that this is just kind of the evolution of where threat actors are going, the types of attacks that we're seeing, and where security professionals and also infrastructure and virtualization professionals have to adjust to, because if we don't, then we end up paying the price. So this is where we come into ZeroLock, right? Obviously, I'm from Vali Cyber. ZeroLock is our product, and it really helps to mitigate a lot of the problems that we've been talking about. It's the first of its kind in terms of preemptive security on ESXi and on other hypervisors, and also on Linux. I mean, we could talk about that, but since this is a VMUG event, we're going to focus a lot on the hypervisor that's most relevant to this crowd, which would be ESXi specifically. So yeah, it's preemptive. It helps get ahead of threats using things like CLI MFA. This will make more sense as we work through things. It can definitely do protection. It's not just detection. It's not just visibility and alerting. It is also able to take action and do things like automated remediation and stopping attacks while they're in process or before they even start. And it's also very deployable, flexible, really, really low overhead. Every environment's a little bit different, so I won't give you inaccurate numbers for your environment, but suffice to say, very, very low overhead in every environment that we've tested in. And when we go back and look at those TTPs that we saw in the MITRE attack framework, ZeroLock is able to 100% mitigate them when configured correctly, given a specific environment, right? There's obviously little things that have to be tuned to everyone's network. Each one's a little bit different, but it does have the capability to cover 100% of those TTPs that we see being called out there by MITRE. Okay, so now I want to get into some of the fun stuff, though. We've gotten a lot of the context out of the way. Let's talk about what is actually happening in a lot of these attacks. In particular, we talked about BRICKSTORM and the UNC 5221, the PRC associated threat group that we believe is behind the BRICKSTORM malware and its deployment. Let's just talk a little bit about what exactly is going on here. Essentially, it looks like a lot of the other attacks that we've seen against ESXi over the last couple of years, where it is a pivot from they've gained access to the network somewhere else. In this case, you can see, hey, we have web servers and some of the DCs, the domain controllers in that network that get exploited first. And then eventually we laterally move through the network to make our way in, gain access to the VMware vCenter server, and from there we deploy BRICKSTORM. And oftentimes this is one of the final goals, one of the later steps in attacks like these, because of what it gives them access to. So if you gain access to, the domain controller is obviously a great target. Having a web server is fine too. But once we're able to get into the network and we gain access to to either vCenter or to the underlying hypervisor, this is a really big deal for a threat actor, particularly those invested in trying to understand intelligence data about this network. There's some other information on here about, the language it's compiled in, which is Go. It makes it easy to transport between different platforms. It makes it easy to compile for ESX systems as well. And also I want to highlight that many infections were undiscovered for over a year. There really is a long linger time for a lot of these kind of high equity, more sophisticated attacks using things like BRICKSTORM. And that's a lot of the point of developing a backdoor, is that you can come back, right, several times and gather new data as it becomes available, steal new virtual machines as they come online, that sort of thing. So to demonstrate part of what the later portion of this attack looks through, I want to run you guys through a quick demo. So the first thing we're going to do is we say that we've already got creds, right? We're going to kind of pretend like we're this Chinese threat group, and we've got this super secret password that exists within this VM. Now, at this point, we're just a system administrator, right? We've got this data that's held within this VM that we want to get as the threat actor. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put on our threat actor hat, and we're going to log into the hypervisor that's running that virtual machine that has that secret in it. We're going to then gather some data, as you see on screen currently, gather some data about the virtual machines that are currently running here. And once we do that, it's already kind of happened, but you see this vmkfs tools command that we've run. We're using this to clone the virtual disk. So we're putting that in Scratch clone, and from there we can do other operations on it. Once we put it in the Scratch directory, then we have a little bit more access to this VMDK. This is that virtual hard drive file, right? The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to try and extract the relevant information from this hard drive. And this is something that has been observed in the wild. We know that threat actors are doing this kind of thing. And this is just really an example of what can be done once they already have access to your hypervisor. What are the kinds of attacks that get perpetrated against hypervisors? Well, we see ransomware. We also see data theft, things like this. So now we can go in, we can look at some of the extracted files and directories that were within this VMDK. And we're just going to do a quick search through them to try and find that super secret password that we saw earlier. So again, I want to highlight, there it is. So we just got the data out of it. I want to highlight, though, we didn't actually log in to the virtual machine. right? We don't have the creds for that for whatever reason. We just have creds to the hypervisor. But once we gain access to the hypervisor, because we have that low level access and we have access to each one of these guest operating systems at a very, very low level, now what we can do is we can clone those virtual disks, we can extract the data within them, and we can gain access to all of the secrets that are inside of them. So although in this case, this is a silly ABC123, like piece of data, this could be passwords, this could be proprietary information, this could be, trade secrets, whatever it is that we're interested in that was on that virtual machine. Once we have that virtual disk, there's a very good chance that, given enough time, we're going to be able to get access to, which is the bet that a lot of these more sophisticated threat actors are making with attacks like this. Okay, so what do we do about this? Well, now what I want to do is I want to show you how we stop this kind of thing. And this is going to be a really, really quick one. I'm going to jump into a couple of other things that we can do surrounding this attack. But let's jump into this one really quick. This is going to be a slightly different environment, but we're going to use the same tactics. So we're going against this particular 50.118 host in our network. It's another ESXi machine. And this one has a virtual machine named Gandalf in it. And so we're going to target that VMDK using that same VMK FS tools. You can see that our connection got killed. And then if we come over here to ZeroLock and we look at the alert that was generated, we can even see the files that were being targeted, as well as all of the processes involved in that. So this is a lot quicker than what you saw before, right? And that's because ZeroLock was able to head this off before we even made it to the point where we'd be trying to extract data from the virtual disk, because we stopped it from ever being cloned in the beginning. And this is one example of a way that ZeroLock helps to address some of these more sophisticated attacks that are happening against hypervisors. We can talk about a few other ones, right? So something that I mentioned earlier was virtual machine escapes. And what I want to do now is this is another quick demo kind of highlighting one of the pathways that we've seen threat actors go through for escaping virtual machines in the past. So this is kind of the opposite scenario in this case. So imagine another attack where instead of having the credentials to the hypervisor, what we actually have, and I'm actually going to pause the video here really quick so we can talk about this before it proceeds. What we actually have is we have access to the virtual machine itself. So what you're looking at right now is just an Ubuntu desktop, right? This is just an example, but we have access to the virtual machine. And what we want to do from this point is we want to gain access to the hypervisor. We want to be able to do all that stuff that we saw previously. So this is just another threat vector. This is another ingress method that we could see a threat actor using. And this is associated with CVE 2025-22224. You can see that in the proof of concept exploit that I've got a script for that's about to run on the screen. This is part of a chain of CVEs that came out last year. And it's actually, funny enough, bear with me, I know I'm moving fast through this, but funny enough, it's one of two different sets of CVEs that were released last year against ESXi. So essentially what I'm saying is virtual machine escape, what we're about to demonstrate, and we're about to demonstrate how ZeroLock responds to it. Virtual machine escape is a very, very real threat that has been exploited in the wild in the last 6 months, I think, using zero-day exploits before they were even CVEs. So before that they were publicly known, we've seen, threat actors that have done virtual machine escapes in the wild to go from the guest operating system down to the ESXi host, and then, able to do whatever they want after that. So I'm going to go ahead and let this one proceed. What we're doing is we're hijacking the VMX process. And our exploit said apparently that we were able to successfully do that. But what we're going to see is that ZeroLock was actually able to stand in the way of that. We triggered this ESXi VMX alert here. And if we look in here, what's really cool is the amount of visibility that ZeroLock has. So we can see that all the way back to the init process, then we can see through into the VMX process, and we can see that outbound netcat connection that I was trying to do with that malicious script that I was running. So that was the full process, right? I was trying to escape the virtual machine, gain access to the underlying ESXi host, and then I was attempting to make an outbound connection just using the native netcat binary that exists on all ESXi systems to try and give myself a remote connection. Right, that was the total exploit that I was trying to run there, and ZeroLock was able to stand in the way of it before I was ever able to actually gain access. So if I went and I checked on that netcat connection right now, we would see that it had actually been killed, and that although the exploit itself still exists in this vulnerable ESXi host, ZeroLock does not allow it to be exploited. It doesn't allow it to actually be taken advantage of, which is a pretty key capability. The place that this really fits in, we talked a little bit previously about patching schedules and about how virtual machines, they have some of these critical vulnerabilities. Again, we've seen those two sets of virtual machine vulnerabilities in the last 12 months. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations don't have time to apply those patches or don't have resources to apply those patches immediately. Hopefully all of them do, but unfortunately not all. That is not the case across the board. And what this provides is a mitigation for those kinds of vulnerabilities. So although maybe that the underlying operating system is still vulnerable, having zero lock in place on top of that can give us some reassurance that attackers can't actually take advantage of that vulnerability, because zero lock will stop it once it sees that type of behavior. Just to kind of highlight what we're doing there. Okay, one other method of this is that in all of the attacks that we've talked about so far, the attackers have, well, except for the virtual machine escape, but in our cloning attack chain that we just saw a moment ago, where we were cloning those virtual disks, we were walking in the front door, right? We were just logging into the ESXi system over SSH. And unfortunately, that is the reality of what we are seeing in a lot of these attacks with credential compromise from both high and low sophistication threat actors. We're seeing a lot of them are doing phishing attacks or gaining credentials one way or another. And one of the things that zero lock can do to stand in the way of that is we have CLI MFA. So we can enforce multi-factor authentication over things like SSH and other commands that we want to run on the CLI. So to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to SSH back into that same system that we were looking at previously. It prompts me for the password. Up to that point, it looks normal. But then what you're seeing now is once I've successfully authenticated with the password, it hooks and it says, hey, who are you? I need another factor of authentication. And then I use, I have Google Authenticator on my smartphone. I use that to authenticate, and I'm actually able to gain access. But I would be denied that if I didn't have that extra factor, right? So in a lot of these instances that we see with folks like PRC associated threat actors or Scattered Spider, to talk about one of the ransomware gangs who does this kind of thing a lot. Most of the time, again, they're just walking in the front door, and this would be a great mitigating control to prevent them from being able to do that quite as easily, right? Even though SSH is disabled in most of our environments, oftentimes what they're doing is they're gaining access to vCenter first. They select the host that they want to enable SSH on, and they go in and just enable the SSH service and then log in as root, right? That's a very, very common technique that we're seeing used across the board with threat actors. This is one of those controls that we can put in place to prevent folks from being able to do that exact same thing so easily, right? In order for them to be able to do it here, they would have to not only have that root credential, but they'd also have to steal someone's smartphone or otherwise gain access to their time-based token generator, which is a whole nother level of complication, throwing a wrench in a lot of these operations. Okay, now we were talking about BRICKSTORM earlier, and this next video is a pretty quick one, but what I want to show you here is how we can respond to things like BRICKSTORM. So all attacks happen in layers, right? All attacks, we have the outside layer where we're just gaining initial access. We have maybe a little bit of intelligence gathering or reconnaissance that's happening once we have initial access. And then we actually have payload deployment, all of these kinds of things, right? What we're going to be talking about here is we're giving this attacker access already. So they've already SSH'd in, maybe they've somehow circumnavigated CLI MFA, or maybe it was enabled, or maybe, any number of other ways that they could have gained access to this host initially. And then at the next layer, what Zero Lock is doing is we have a capability called application allow listing that gets in the way of things like BRICKSTORM. And it's a pretty simple one, but you'll see here that it's pretty robust. All we're really doing here is we're saying this is a new executable that's not on my allow list. And so although you were able to download it and you were able to bring the BRICKSTORM executable to ESXi, I'm going to stand in the way and mark it as a suspicious executable and prevent it from being able to execute by default. Now, for a lot of you who are really familiar with ESXi, this probably sounds a little bit similar to exec installed only, and it is. There's a lot of overlap between this and what exec installed only does. We just take it a step further. So exec installed only has a couple of issues with it. Some of them dealing with how simple it is to disable. But one of the other glaring problems, I think, with it that we talk about a lot is the ability to pass interpreted scripts through their interpreter. So you can do something like, instead of calling a Python script directly, if you call Python and then you give the Python script as an argument, exec installed only oftentimes will not prevent that from happening, even though that Python script may be a new binary that got brought in. So that's one of the major deficiencies, and it's one of the things that application allow listing actually can address. And it's smart enough to understand, hey, this is a new script that I've never seen before. It's not on my application allow list. Even though it's being passed through an interpreter, I'm still going to implicitly deny that. And that's what you were able to see here. This one was obviously just an executable, the actual BRICKSTORM executable associated with many of the attacks. But you can see that ZeroLock was able to flag that. It noted that it was not something that it had seen before, and it marked it as a suspicious executable and denied execution. I know we're moving pretty quick through a lot of this, and I promise that we will have a Q&A at the end, and I'm happy to take any questions about any of these. But there's obviously a lot of things to talk about. There's a lot of threats against ESXi, and the malicious VIB vector, I think, is a really important one. This is one that I really wanted to get to today. So we're going to press through this one. FireAnt is another group that has been observed using malicious VIBs, essentially. Now, again, this is probably no surprise to all of you. VIB is a vSphere installation bundle. It's one of the supported ways to actually move new installed binaries to ESXi hosts, right? This is how we do a lot of that installation. There are controls around what kinds of VIBs can be installed on ESXi hosts. We have different things like acceptance levels that we're going to get into here in just a second. But unfortunately, a lot of those controls and protections can be circumnavigated. And that's part of what I'm going to be showing you here today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how ZeroLock addresses some of those deficiencies in these compensating controls that we have. But to talk a little bit about how FireAnt was using this, this was an attack vector that we saw used a couple of times in 2025. They installed a malicious VIB. This was for persistence as well, very much something like BRICKSTORM that they were doing. And they were able to bypass a lot of the traditional controls because they were doing this. Usually the way that we see this one happen with them too is they come in through something like vCenter. So they gain access, again, very, very similar story to some of the previous ones in terms of how they get there in the first place. They gain access to the network from some other vulnerable interface, whether that's a web server, whether that's stolen credentials, and then a VPN login, whether it's a firewall exploit. They gain access from some other place, and then they pivot across the network until they're able to make it to vCenter. They harvest creds however they can, and then they log in and they're able to deploy VIBs that way. So that's a lot of what we see with them. And what I want to do now is I want to walk you through malicious VIBs and kind of why this is an important thing and what unfortunately we've been able to determine are some of the problems with this. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and this is going to move pretty fast, but I've got an Akira ransomware sample over here that I'm just going to try and SCP. And so I'm just going to try and copy it over to an ESXi host simply, and then I'm going to attempt to execute. And in the amount of time it took me to say that, we're actually already done. It already attempted to run it. And what I've got on the right side of the screen here, though, is we're watching the VM kernel log. And what we may have noticed here is that, I'm going to try and highlight this with my cursor, is that we were denied execution because it is not installed. So this is that exec installed only capability that we talked about previously. Now, one of the ways that we can overcome this is by installing the binary, right? So to talk, this is not actually the exact descriptor XML file that we're using in this instance, but this is a good example of what a descriptor XML file is. It's one of the key components of a VIB. It's because essentially at the end of the day, VIBs really are glorified zip archives is really what they are, with a couple of proprietary extra files that get thrown in to do things like categorizing what some of the requirements are for the software that we're trying to install at the VIB, as well as things like version numbers and where it came from, right? So we add that, we construct a VIB, we homebrew this, we're the threat actor, we homebrew a VIB to try and deploy the Akira ransomware that we tried to deploy, without a VIB a few moments ago and got blocked by exec installed only. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to try and move that VIB into the scratch directory. It's one of our favorite directories for being able to actually have, modification privileges within the ESXi file system. So we move it over, and now we're going to run this ESXi software VIB install command to attempt to actually install it. And unfortunately for us, it doesn't pass extensibility checks. Oh no, this is a bad day for us as an attacker, right? Well, actually, no. As you may have noticed, all I had to do was add a TACF, a -F to this command to force it without running extensibility checks. And we overcome that problem, but we do run into another one, and it is the acceptance level. So the acceptance level, we have 4 different acceptance levels, and I won't bore you with going through what they are. One, they go from Broadcom made this VIB to a community, which is what this one currently is. And without special signatures, it's hard to make a VIB that is anything other than community without getting special signatures from the software owners of ESXi. So we also struggle a little bit here to change our acceptance level of this ESXi host, but we're going to try and find a way to overcome that here in this next bit. Now, if you do some digging into some of the built-in utilities within ESXi, you can actually find that there are a couple of commands you can run to change your acceptance level in ways that we don't believe are necessarily intended, and that's probably that's the part that we're going to show next. So we're going to start off with this next part showing, hey, the current acceptance level of this ESXi host is partner supported. Okay, that's a problem for us because we have a community supported VIB and we want to be able to install it so we can overcome exec installed only. So what we're going to do is we're going to echo community supported into an acceptance.json file, and then we're going to run this special config store cli command to update our configuration with that acceptance.json file that we have. And now what you'll notice is that we are at a community supported acceptance level. So now we've done that. We've solved our acceptance level problem. Let's try and install our malicious VIB. And this time we are actually able to successfully do it. And we don't even require a reboot. In fact, as soon as we run that, and then we find the file that was installed, we're able to fully run our Akira ransomware against this host. So we use a malicious VIB to deploy our ransomware and circumnavigate both the acceptance level issues and our exec installed only protections that we previously had here. And as you can see, the Gimli virtual machine that we're targeting here has been fully encrypted. So it's a pretty bad day for the administrator of this ESXi host. But what can we do about this? Well, we're going to, as I mentioned before, all these attacks happen in layers, right? These all happen in, there's the layer of bringing in the malicious VIB. There's the layer of actually installing the malicious VIB. There's the layer of changing the acceptance levels or maybe disabling exec installed only or what have you. There's a bunch of different ways we could get at this. And I'm going to show you one very simple way that ZeroLock can address some of the issues that we just observed. Now, this is a different system, but the concept's going to be the same. So we're going to SSH in really quick. And then what I'm going to do is I've already got a preloaded VIB on this ESXi host, and I'm going to run the ESXi software VIB install command. Now, what you'll notice before I'm going to pause it here so that I can talk a little bit longer about this. What you'll notice is that we didn't actually get an error about community supported or anything like that, and that's because we've already done all of that, right? We're able to circumnavigate all of the issues with our support level and everything. But what we want to do next is we try and actually run that ESXi install command, and the alert that we got is all about our ESXi usage. So what ZeroLock can do is, before we even get into any of that, knowing that we're going to have to use ESXi software VIB install as a command from the get-go, ZeroLock can monitor the usage of that command in the first place and prevent unauthorized users from being able to even have a chance at being able to run that. So independent of all of the issues with, what our support level is and what have you, ZeroLock is able to stand in the way and prevent this attack before it even happens. So this is the protection that we have in place, one of the many protections we have in place for this particular kind of attack. And it's just one of the more direct ones. So it's one of the ones I like to show off here. A couple other things that I'll highlight just as we go through here. We're getting close to the end, and then I promise I'm going to be happy to take some questions. This next part that we want to talk about is a different threat vector. We're actually going to show the Power CLI API, someone trying to disable ZeroLock. We've shown already a couple of times how useful ZeroLock is in a lot of these ESXi instances. And now what we're going to do is, from our attacker machine, we're going to run this remove component PowerShell script to try and use Power CLI to interact with our ESXi host and just disable ZeroLock from the get-go. And unfortunately for me as an attacker, this is something that we're really good at detecting, is manipulation through different methods, right? And in particular for Power CLI, we know that this comes through host D. And so that's how this one is flagged, is manipulation of the ZeroLock process through the host D daemon. To talk about kind of just one or two other things. This is one that, again, if you've heard us talk about this before, I told you I was not going to talk too much about ransomware, but we are going to show just kind of one quick demo with ransomware. And this is a living off the land ransomware attack. So we didn't bring in any new binaries. We used only native tools. And in fact, I will pause here. We're going to go back just a little bit so you can see this. We're using only native tools to do this. So we've got a grep command for searching through the Gandalf virtual machine and all of its files, piping that through xargs into OpenSSL. I apologize, the screen gets a little wonky there, but that's an OpenSSL command. OpenSSL obviously is one of the underpinnings of modern open source cryptography, and it's what we're using to encrypt all of those files associated with Gandalf. So we didn't bring in any new binaries. We're living off the land, right? We're just using native tools to run a ransomware attack. And I know that a lot of the things that I've showed you up to this point have been zero lock monitoring different binaries or seeing, hey, this is a foreign thing that I don't recognize. These are all native things. So we're circumnavigating all of those protections simply by using native tools, but zero lock is still smart enough to be able to detect that. Oops, we skipped. We'll run this one real quick one more again. Yeah, so we're going to see this attack go. Zero lock very quickly detects it, kills our connection, and then if we come back over here and we look at we take a look at what is being reported, we can see that it's flagging this as a ransomware attack, which is accurate. That's actually what it is. We can see that one of the Gandalf VMDK files was targeted. We have that nuclear radiation symbol as our spooky file extension there at the end. And then we can actually see all of the commands that were associated with that living off the land ransomware attack, including the OpenSSL command that was used to encrypt that VMDK file. One of the things that I like to show here is that then if we come over and we try and turn on the Gandalf virtual machine, you can see that, hey, the VMDK file is not found because we did allow one file to get encrypted. And this is why one of the important things that zero lock can do is it can actually undo file changes that were made by malicious activity as well. This is not a full backup solution. This is just file rollback for specific incidents, right? And now if we do that, if we tell zero lock, hey, go ahead and roll back all those file changes, we can come back over to that Gandalf virtual machine, and then we can see that we actually are able to log in fully and have a fully saved virtual machine, unlike what we had seen previously in a ransomware attack. Okay, and then kind of as one last little demo thing here, this one's just kind of fun. This is another tactic that we've seen in recent months against ESXi system, and it's rogue virtual machines. So these are virtual machines that won't show up in normal directories like things like vCenter because they're started in a strange way. And it's by directly calling the VMX process to start some of these virtual machines, which is what we're going to show here. This is one of the commands involved in that process of starting a rogue virtual machine. As you can see, much like many of our other attacks, we had our connection killed as soon as we attempted to do it, and zero lock brought up an alert, flagged us for this, and we were able to observe all of that behavior within zero lock. So this is a pretty finely tuned security tool for a lot of the threats that we're actually seeing against hypervisors today, including all the ones that I've showed you. Cloning virtual disks, rogue virtual machines, installing malware, running living off the land ransomware attacks. A lot of the things that we're actually seeing happen against hypervisors today, those are the things that we're super focused on with zero lock. Okay, so I'm almost done talking. And what I want to do now is there's a couple of QR codes on the screen that give access to a couple of resources if you do have more information. I'm going to come back to this one and I'll leave this up while we're going through the Q&A as well. But we have some reporting on BRICKSTORM and what is actually happening there, so you can get a little bit more information if you haven't heard of it yet about how it's being deployed by threat actors. And then there's obviously some stuff. If you want to learn more about zero lock, we can definitely have more discussions about that. And then how we are compatible with VCF9 and how zero lock kind of plays nicely with VCF9 and how the two tools complement each other. Okay, and with that, I will stop talking. I appreciate you guys all sticking with me here today, and I'm excited to take any questions if there are any. Happy to talk about the technology as in depth as we can here.
Thanks so much, Nathan. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Megan Howard. I'm the VP of Marketing with Vali Cyber. And here to answer any of your questions that you may have. Please feel free to use the chat or Q&A feature at the bottom of your toolbar. That was great, Nathan. I did want to make sure that this group in particular saw this last QR code over here to the right. For VMUG exclusively, we have a sign-up form where you can sign up to be eligible for a free zero lock license. So if you're interested in test driving for yourself any of the features that Nathan walked you through here today, please do fill out that form and we'll be in touch to set you up. Let's see. We've got a question, which is, how is zero lock licensed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So zero lock is typically licensed by core. Yeah. So we're going to fall right in line with how VMware and Broadcom does a lot of their licensing for ESXi. So if you already have those numbers, that's basically the method that we use for determining licensing. It's by core, and then pricing varies depending on how many cores.
Yep, perfect. Thanks so much. So Nathan, I was interested to learn more about the nation state actors because
Sure.
I feel like that's been like a relatively new development.
I definitely won't say that it's entirely new, right? So this kind of thing has been around, but it's been a lot quieter in the past.
Mm,
What we're seeing, I think, right now with nation state actors, when it comes to hypervisors in particular, is there's a renewed interest, and I think it's for a lot of the reasons that we talked about. It's because people aren't really monitoring them. They have a really wide impact. And actually, something cool. I'm glad you brought this up because I think something kind of interesting about this. Maybe I shouldn't say cool, but something interesting about this at the very least is that ESXi is far and away, the most prevalent in enterprise networks, right? We see it as the dominant, hypervisor currently, and so there's a lot of interest in that. However, in the last few months as well, we have also seen threat actors going after Nutanix as well, right? So obviously this is VMUG, we're more focused on ESXi, but just as kind of GWiz information and to give you the kind of broader view about what threat actors are doing. This is not just an ESXi problem; it's a hypervisor problem. It's an everyone problem because we're all using virtualization at some layer. And yeah, Nutanix is not exempt from this, and I don't think that other hypervisors are going to be exempt from this long term either.
yeah, interesting. And it just goes back to, what we've been seeing, I guess with the more sort of private threat actors, it's just the blast radius of these attacks and the level of impact that they can have. And I guess, in particular with the nation state, because it's a little more focused on like, APT and all of that and having this sustained persistence over a long time.
Yeah.
I think especially for the hypervisor layer, because there's been such limited visibility prior to zero lock being introduced of that layer, it makes it so easy for folks to just sit
Yeah.
and not be observed. Yeah. Ugh, it's
Yeah,
tricky.
when you're not monitoring an area, that's a really good place for someone who's interested in lingering for a long time to just sit and wait and do their thing and observe, right? It's also so we obviously focus a lot on the effects that can be deployed against hypervisors and what you can steal out of a hypervisor and everything. But
Mm,
one of the recurring themes that we were talking about that these threat actors will do is that it's all about pivoting through the network, right? So they gain access. I mentioned this a couple of times. You gain access through one thing and then you pivot until you reach the hypervisor. Sometimes the hypervisor is not the end goal. Sometimes, I mean, in an increasing number of cases it is, but sometimes it's not the end goal. Sometimes it's just the next pivot, right? So they take that, and then what they really want to get to is some database server that's external to that hypervisor or something, right?
yeah.
And because the hypervisor, as you say, is something that's less monitored, you're able to linger there for a long time just because there's not great visibility at the actual hypervisor OS level. It's a really good staging ground for other attacks too. So although we focus a lot on the effects that happen against hypervisors, it's worth noting that sometimes it's a staging ground, and it's still worth protecting to prevent that lateral movement through your network. So
Right. So particularly for nation state actors,
mhm.
are there particular sectors that need to be concerned about this kind of attack or really kind of
Sure.
thinking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, there definitely are. I would say for nation state actors, it's what you would imagine nation state threat actors would be interested in, right? So defense, finance, infrastructure, that kind of stuff. I would say any of those in particular need to be concerned about high equity. I mean, when I say infrastructure, I mean I really mean that can be a lot of things. That can be whether that's logistics, whether that's food, like major grocers, that kind of thing. Obviously, the big ones that people think about, utilities, those sorts of things. Like everyone is really worried about power grid attacks, which I think is justified and reasonable. But I mean, when we talk about infrastructure, it's really anything that degrades quality of life in a place, right? So any of those hospitals, I think, are another big one too. So healthcare in general, any of those kinds of domains, any of those industries, I think are big targets for nation state actors. There's actually an increasingly large amount of crossover, I think, between that and non-nation state actors. More kind of the more financially motivated ransomware groups or that kind of thing, because they know that those are still high impact. They know that they're more likely to pay ransoms or to try and resolve things quickly and to react to the attack because they're a crucial capability, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's why I'd say those industries in particular.
So Julie just asked another question. I'm so excited for this question. It's such a good one. Thank you for asking it, because it gives you a chance to talk about anti-tampering.
Sure.
How does Zero Lock protect itself from an attack? Thinking
Yeah.
that if this gets compromised, it gives a lot more controls over the whole ESXi environment.
Sure. Yeah, I think that last part of it too, right? Like if you are able to compromise a security control, that's almost always the case, right? Like if you're able to access any security control, then that obviously gives a lot of access to whatever environment you're in, hypervisors or not, zero lock or not. Yeah, so I think I agree with you, Megan. This is a good one to talk about. We do have a lot of focus on anti-tampering because we recognize that as a security tool, that's something that we need to be focused on. So a lot of the things that we do are the things that you would expect. Multi-factor authentication on all, authentication for zero lock is a big one. And then zero lock is very, very finely tuned to understand the types of threats that can come against it for things like disabling too. That was one of the things that we talked about briefly. We showed that the power CLI attack vector against this, where we're using, not a third party API, but an API external to logging in over SSH or doing a vulnerability exploit kind of thing. Instead, we just use Power CLI to try and tell the ESXi host with credentials. We try to use it to tell the ESXi host, hey, shut down zero lock. And we can see zero lock standing in the way of that. A lot of the other things we do are things like, SSO integration or identity management. I think there's kind of two different things that we really get at when we talk about like compromising security tools. And it's one is the ability to shut them down, deactivate them, that kind of thing. And then the second one is more being able to take control of them. So when we talk about anti-tampering, a lot of what we're focused on is preventing degradation, preventing someone from being able to just, trivially shut us down or prevent us from doing our thing so that they can then do something else nasty. And then the other half of that, I think, is a lot of just what we find to be industry best practices for securing logins to zero lock, like again, SSO, MFA, all of those kinds of things. And then obviously having good practices with who has permissions to those kinds of things. The insider threat is always a threat. And there's only so much we can do against the human element. But I think in terms of how we are protecting ourselves, we do a lot of focus on making sure zero lock knows how it can be tampered with, as well as all of the best practices for securing, logins and authentications.
Sure. So Julie, hopefully that answers your question. Let us know if you have any follow-up.
Yeah, happy to know more.
Mark also has a question, which is, how does zero lock alert admins when it senses suspicious activity?
That's a really, really good question. So there's a couple different ways we can do this. What you saw in the demo, right? You saw a couple of alerts pop up, and that was just through the built-in zero lock web UI, which is one option if you have an admin that's monitoring the web UI. Now, I know that a lot of security teams don't want to add another interface they have to go log into. So what we've done is we've integrated with, there's three major ways that we can do alert, what do you call that? Being able to send alerts to administrators, right? So there's a really simple one. We can do email-based alerts, right? So when you generate an alert, you can have it send out an email to a list of administrators. That's not the most popular one. The one that I find people use the most is actually, we have an HTTP transport capability that essentially takes all of the alert data, packages up into a JSON format, and then sends it to a collector for another front end. So if you're using a scene like Splunk or, CrowdStrike, whatever it may be, right? Like whatever Sumo Logic, like whatever your favored front end is, most of them have the capability to do like an HTTP collector, where then zero lock will send that data to that collector. And then you may have to do a little bit of like data normalization. We've done it for a few. So we have some built in for a lot of the big names in the SIEM world. But that's the most common method that we see folks use for getting those alerts in front of administrators, because usually they already have some kind of framework for that. And then we just hook into it that way. The last way is that we do have a fully fledged API too. So, and you can gather all that through the API. So if there's a desire to do that, to do some of the legwork with doing API automation, then zero lock also offers that. But I think the most direct answer to your question is HTTP alert forwarding. So just sending that data to your favorite front end.
Yeah. And just to that end, there's alerting, and then there's also, so we have kind of an alert only mode. We also have go ahead and handle it mode. And, you're able to sort of set that spectrum based on what you feel comfortable with and that particular environment. Yeah,
absolutely. I think a lot of what you're getting at there, Megan, is zero lock's ability to automate response versus like actually including an administrator. So 100% zero lock can just send alerts and not do anything, not be very invasive. Or you can tell zero lock, hey, I want you to take action on this, right? If you see a ransomware attack, kill it, remediate it, do it all, and then tell me about it afterwards, right? There's that, and then there's a couple of gradients in between that as well, with how invasive you want it to be. Short answer for getting the alerts, we can send it to your favorite scene, and then obviously the necessity of alert, I think, is what you're getting at there, Megan, is like, do you need to know about this right away? And it's how much leeway have you given Zero Log to take action on it? Those are all, conversations we can have on a network to network basis, depending on what the needs of the organization are, for sure.
Absolutely. Yep. Wonderful. Well, if there are, oh, here, one more question.
Okay.
Does ZeroLock have a reporting capability? We often get asked for month-end reporting.
Yeah, that's another really, really good question. What Zero Luck? So unfortunately, we don't have a, produce a nice PDF, like an exec level quality PDF automatically and then ship it out to administrators so they can send it to, their manager or whatever. We don't currently have something like that. What we do have is we do have statistics. So Zero Luck and the dashboard. This is something that if you're interested in talking more about this, we can go through it. You can get statistics from Zero Luck about, hey, how many alerts have there been? What kinds have they been? How many of them have been, responded to, that kind of thing. We try to make it easy to gather that data. It does not have an automated reporting functionality. However, if that's something that you are doing through your front end already, so we were in the last question, talking about moving that alert data to other, SIEMs or something like that. Then of course Zero Lock's alerts can integrate with that, right? So if you already have something that's producing automated alerts in that way, then you can take that data from Zero Lock, send it to that, and then you can allow that reporting to come out of that functionality as well.
Yeah. And my understanding is that we're also continuing to flesh out our reporting capabilities on the roadmap as we move forward.
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good call out. That is something actually we've been asked that question before, and it is something that we are trying to improve the tooling on a little bit, to produce some kind of automated reporting. Like I said, again, the data is all there, and we have it, and we can ship it out to something else that's doing that automated reporting for you, and that's probably something that in the coming months will be added to Zero Lock as a feature. And if we had, if we were working with someone who really wanted that feature, that'd probably be something that came pretty quickly. but yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. I think that's all of the questions that we have here today. And so I think with that, we can hand things back over to Tristan to wrap up.
Alrighty, thank you all for joining. You can find all future VMUG webcasts here. Valley Cyber will have another webinar on March 12th, and then another one in May, May 7th to be exact. So scan this QR code and you can register for all future VMUG webcasts. In VMUG Connect, we have 5 this year, first of which is happening in Amsterdam, March 17th through the 19th, and then the first one in North America will be in Minneapolis, April 7th through 9th. You can connect with Valley Cyber at each one of these connects. They will be at all 5, so feel free to register. Registration is open for all of them. You can see the QR code at the bottom left. Alrighty, as I mentioned in the beginning, this session was recorded and it will be sent out in a post wrap-up email to everyone that registered, and it'll also be posted on our VMUG YouTube channel. So this session was recorded and we'll get it out to you guys shortly. And at the end of this, once we end the webinar, you'll be prompted to fill out a survey. Please fill it out. It helps us bring you fresh and relevant content in all future webcasts. And lastly, use code COMMUNITY in all caps for 10% off of a 1-year VMUG Advantage membership. Thank you all for joining and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks for having us. Thank you so much for hosting.
Thanks, folks.